Money is debt. This is not a theory, it's simple math. Don't believe me? Well, I need you to do two things. Number one, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And then number two, take out your wallet and take out a $1 US bill. And if you zoom in, you'll see that it's right there. It's a proof of debt. It's an IOU effectively. Now let's say you're in the UK and you take out a £5 bill, and you'll see the same thing. I promise to pay the bearer a certain amount of money. You see, money is debt. Money is either circulating government debt or it's created by banks by making loans. It's basically where the concept of money comes from. Now, if money is debt, I want to explore where did this concept of debt even come from? How did ancient civilizations come up with it, and how did they use it? So, buckle in and let's take a deep dive into the history of debt. There's a historian called David Graeber, and he wrote a book called Debt: The First 5,000 Years. And when you read it, it makes you realize just how much of our beliefs regarding ancient finance was simply wrong. You see, most people think that early societies used a barter system to do trade. We think that people directly exchanged their goods with each other. So if this was true, it would have been a very inefficient system because it would rely heavily on a chance that two parties would have exactly the same goods that they needed in the exact quantities that they needed it in. So then people invented money to make things simpler. And soon enough, people with more money began loaning them to others with less, creating debt. Now, this might sound like a logical sequence of how finance progressed back then, but it is incorrect. And we have none other than Adam Smith to blame for it. You see, Adam Smith was working 3 centuries earlier, and he had little to no primary resources to work with. He simply made an assumption that people in earlier times would use the barter system to exchange and to make trade. Now, fast forward to today, and now we have more evidence about how societies functioned back in ancient times, and it turns out Smith was wrong. We know this because the practice of accounting was already prevalent even before money emerged on the scene. And what exactly was being accounted for? It was debt. First came debt, which led to money, which finally led to barter. By the way, I made a video about how the bartering system came to be and how it was used in ancient times, so check it out over here if you haven't already. So anyway, to understand the history of debt, we first need to realize that commerce as we know it today is very recent. For much of the past, every economic interaction played out very differently. In fact, before industrialization, the average person could probably go about their life without ever using money. Instead, everyday life of an average person would be built on IOUs, trust, and a carefully constructed social system based on morals and values. You see, money did not create debt. Instead, money was created to help manage debt better. Now, I am curious to hear your thoughts about this, so please do drop a comment below and let me know. Also, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, it really helps me out. Anyway, as long as there has been civilization, there has been the concept of debt. In fact, the concept of debt and a functioning civilization could not exist without each other. A civilization is composed of an organized society with various rules and norms. This includes law, religion, rituals, and other such aspects. And to ensure people followed these rules and norms, you needed an enforcement mechanism. And that enforcement mechanism was debt, both economic and social. In ancient times, people simply didn't go around with large crates of items ready to barter whenever they found another party willing to barter with them. Or, for that matter, a ruler marching with his army miles away in enemy territory wouldn't be expected to carry his own palace gold at all times. Rather, what was owed was accounted for and then repaid later when it was feasible. This meant both social and moral obligations. Soldiers marched for their lords because they were indebted to him via allegiance, and a lord had to pay their armies to maintain them because he was indebted in their service. And similarly, if you think about it, organized religion was made possible by enforcing the belief that people were indebted in some sort of social, moral, or religious capacity. You see, debt is everywhere, literally. But just as debt was used to enforce civilization and an organized society, and in some cases even religion, the concept of debt also allowed a system towards violence and subjugation. Think about it. If a king claims all the power over their subjects, then the subjects' debt towards the king was ultimately infinite. Nothing else really mattered. All that really existed was this concept of being indebted to the king, and that's where violence and subjugation comes into play. After all, for an institution of debt to function at all, those who are unwilling or unable to repay their debts have to be dealt with. This was not an issue in smaller communities where everyone knew each other very well. However, it soon became an issue as relationships expanded beyond communities and people were exchanging favors and trades with each other and with strangers. And this is why we see that with the rise of early states, there has also been a rise in slavery. Debt penalties were usually more strictly enforced, and those who had nothing to give would often offer themselves or their family members. In turn, this led to growing inequality in wealth and power. The lenders grew richer while the debtors were poorer and ultimately became serfs or slaves to the former. Now, the rulers of ancient societies were not blind to this. We actually have records of various attempts of addressing this crisis of debt slavery. For example, in Mesopotamia between 2400 to 1400 BC, there were instances of debt cancellations taking place. Mesopotamian rulers would hold great festivals around general debt cancellations as well. Tablets containing debt records would be destroyed, and this would indicate that people would be made free from their repayment obligations and debt slaves were made free from their masters. Similar traditions were also observed in ancient Egypt, as records from the Rosetta Stone indicate. In ancient Israel, we also have the Jubilee laws, which structured the process around debt cancellation, which periodically enabled the freeing of slaves and returning land to original owners. While researching this video, I was actually quite surprised to learn that debt was the primary mode of economic exchange for a very long period in human history. I mean, the timeline from the earliest civilization all the way to medieval ages, currency only grew prominent around the 1400s. So what exactly happened in the 1400s? You see, according to some historians, this may have stemmed from China turning to precious metals for trade with the outside world. And once China started to do this, a few decades later, Europe would discover and conquer the New World. And this would bring a vast influx of precious metals into Europe, and then Europe would use that to trade with China, and this kicked off a great transformation of the world of finance ever since. In this video, we talked about how misguided many people are about the origins of money. It's never been about money, it's always been about debt. Without debt, there's no concept of money. Now, how money is used today is very different from how it was used in ancient civilizations for sure, but the core concept of debt still majorly influences how modern finance really works. If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like this video that I made about the history of barter systems. So please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon.